Fala pessoal do SharpCast, tudo bem com vocês? Bem-vindos aqui ao segundo episódio, que a gente vai estar entrevistando o Nick Kalikas, que é o oddmaker, referência nas linhas de MMA, em Las Vegas, nas offshores, na Europa inteira. O currículo dele é bem invejável, ele é líder mundial na MMA oddmaking, vamos dizer assim, né? As linhas de aposta de MMA praticamente nasceram na mesa dele, vamos dizer assim. Ele é provedor de probabilidades do MMA na AXS TV, apostador e participante do programa UFC Underline da UFC Fight Pass. Hoje, além de entrevistar o Nick, eu estou na companhia aqui do nosso convidado, o Rafael, que é especialista em UFC, apostador profissional também. Vou passar a palavrinha para ele agora, para ele poder se apresentar para vocês aí.
E aí, beleza, pessoal? Eu aposto no UFC, Bellator, vários eventos de MMA desde 2020. E estou aqui convidado para bater esse papo com o Nick. É uma pessoa que eu acho que eu vou aprender muito. Nós temos poucas pessoas aqui no Brasil, então tudo que eu venho absorvendo é de fora, e uma das pessoas é com o Nick. Então hoje eu acho que é uma oportunidade para a gente aprender muita coisa aqui hoje.
Bacana. And now we'll start with Nick here, right? How are you, Nick?
Doing well, my friends. Thank you guys for having me. I'm really looking forward to this.
Nice. Say something, tell us something about you when you started in the betting or in betting first before odds making, obviously, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah, now it's been almost 20 years exactly that I've been in the gambling industry. Of course, my mixed martial arts or my martial arts background before anything started from there. So my roots were from the Taekwondo, from sport karate. So from traditional martial arts is where I kind of got my start. And back then, obviously, I wasn't planning on getting into gambling, getting into betting, getting into, UFC odds making, anything like that. It's just life kind of takes a turn in different directions, with opportunities. And it just kind of led me to that direction. So I did start sports betting very small, betting on football, betting on just casual stuff as a fan before I started making odds. And then I did transition back in 2003 to the sports betting world, and I started making numbers on the UFC and many of the fight leagues that you see today.
Okay. And all about that, you love the sport too, right?
Oh, I love the sport. Yes. Yes, sir. I mean, it's like I said, traditionally from the time I was 3 years old, my dad was a black belt in Taekwondo. So I got brought up in the martial arts background. So it's always been kind of in my blood. And now with, of course, the sports betting, it's very exciting. It always just adds another level to everything. When we're watching, whether it's football, soccer, whatever the sport be, tennis, I think if, have a little bit of action on the game itself, it makes it that much more fun. So, yes, love it.
Nice.
Yeah. One of the things we have in common is the start of the journey. I also started in Taekwondo. Then I've gone to Muay Thai, and after all of this, when we grow up, we have a job. I stopped to fight and started to betting.
Yes, because it's hard to make money fighting, right? It's hard to make money, especially back then. I mean, you're talking for me 20 years ago, there wasn't much money in continuing to fight, or, I was going to karate tournaments and competing in, against different athletes in that regard, but you weren't getting paid. Even if you won a tournament, you won a big trophy, but you spend money on the hotels, you spend money on everything, so you actually lose money by winning a tournament back then. So it wasn't enough money. So yeah, you definitely, even with karate schools, everything like that, the income, it's tough to collect dues from that regard. And yeah, it's hard to make it in a business for sure. The fight business, not easy.
Yeah. The first thing we want to know after your introduction, what is the process of creating an MMA line, MMA line?
Well, honestly, it's been, like I said, about 20 years now. So at the beginning, it was very different than it is now. The beginning, of almost like the internet was fairly new too. There was a lot of things going on with, it was different for sure. It's kind of evolved into what it is now, but at the beginning, there wasn't much like footage because the internet, again, you weren't able to widely go out there and see the past fights or videotape and stuff like that. So you had to dig information more as much as you can by communicating with other fighters, with other coaches, with other people like that, and try to find out, how good the fighter is. And then you kind of develop a system. And back at the beginning, it was a very basic system with a lot of fighter attributes. and just trying to dissect and kind of form an opinion on who was going to win. And then you kind of convert those into numbers, so to speak. And the very basic way at the beginning of things was, okay, you say a fighter fights 10 times. And I know this is going to be very general for a lot of people, but that was one of the first things that, they kind of just glanced at me. They said, oh, if a fighter fights 10 times, how many times out of 10 does this fighter win the fight? You understand? So maybe 7 out of 10 times he wins the fight. So it's very basic concepts like that. And I just developed my own little system. And then through the years, I incorporated as much film study. Like, that is very important. I think that's the number one element, especially right now in the modern day, is actually watching and studying the fighter's film. So just like handicapping, the odds making is very similar to, I know you guys handicap and you guys bet on fights too. So the work that you do putting into the handicapping and putting into developing maybe your own number and seeing what edge, like at the sports book compared to what you have, is basically the same thing. It's just a little bit different, right? So I develop a number, I develop my own odds. And then of course I have to take that number and kind of think about what everybody else thinks outside of myself. That's the little difference though with that, because when you're betting for yourself, who cares what anybody else thinks in a way? Because you have your number, you know what the value is for yourself. When you're making odds and you're putting them and you're sending them to a sports book, you have to also consider, I think, where everybody else is going to plan on betting, because there's a lot of hype. There's a lot of popularity that gets put into the numbers. And sometimes you see a very close fight and the number's overinflated because of that stuff. So I come up with my true number, and then I add a little bit of hype or whatever the equation may be. And I try to kind of predict which way the public and the community is going to come in. And I factor that into my number as well. But again, it's a system that I developed over the years. But a lot of it, the core of it, is honestly film study. And then you put everything else on pen and paper, Excel sheets, everything else that you have going on right now. And also a lot of data that comes into the equation now too. So now again, the modern times, there's so many analytics that come into play, right? So I try to take as much analytics as I can and put them into my formula, and then it comes out a little bit stronger as well. So just so many different aspects and different ways to look at it.
And one doubt we have, it's about the live betting process in MMA. It's a dynamic sport. Everything changes in 1 second, and most of the other sports, we have an algorithm that they use in live for handicapping, but for originating, it's something. We have something qualitative, or only numbers there.
No, honestly, with the live betting market, it's very basic at this point. And because there's not a lot of people that are offering live betting either. You see a lot of the sports books, maybe offer very small limits, or only maybe offering it between rounds. So, as soon as a commercial break, they're only going to put it up for a very limited 1 minute window. But there are some places, obviously, that do put it up throughout the entire fight, and then they'll try to pull it down when something's going on. That's very difficult for sure. But what you do, honestly, is you have to look at the way the fighter is going. So you take the closing line for the live betting, and that's a big indicator of where you're going to kind of start your live betting. And of course, you factor in who won the round, and then you make your adjustments accordingly. But you have to also, again, factor in who you think the people are scoring the fight for as well. And so it's kind of a little bit more on the fly, if that makes sense. So you just kind of make your adjustments based on the closing line, and then you watch and you pay attention to the fight, and you kind of see what's going on in the fight, of course, and you make your adjustment either higher or lower. Now, one important thing that comes into play that a lot of sports books don't factor in is cardio and conditioning for a lot of these fighters. Because you can go out there and you see somebody come out there and looks like $1 million, comes out the gate. He looks so good in round 1, but then in round 2 and round 3, he's a completely different fighter because he slows down and he doesn't have enough gas tank. So that's where you can take advantage sometimes of a lot of these sports books, because they look at what they see in the first round and they think, oh, this guy's going to kill this guy. It's too easy. But it changes. I mean, the sport, obviously, there's a lot of mental, there's a lot of fight IQ, and there's a lot of heart that goes into this. So you just have to kind of adjust things real time and see who's winning. And then, like I said, kind of adjust either higher or lower. But then the wild card always is the judges, as we kind of touched on a little bit. The judging, you just never know with these guys. I mean, it's unpredictable. It's very frustrating. I think that's the hardest part about betting this sport, is because sometimes even if you think you have a sure win, you never know. So that's the thing that you can never factor in exactly which way the judges are going to go.
Yeah, as you started saying about the judges, we want to know about you. there are some fighters that are on the hype of the industry, right? Like Conor McGregor, for example. And do you think that it influences the judges or no?
I think as human beings, automatically you get influenced by stuff like that because you can't. I don't care if you try to be the best you could be and try not to pay attention to any of it. You still know who a guy like Conor McGregor is. You can't tell me you don't know who he is. You can't tell me you don't know how popular he is. So I think that automatically, even without a human being trying to factor that in, it's going to sway you in that direction. If it's a close fight, I think the more popular person is probably going to win more times than not. Or a lot of times I know that I've said this and people I think it's funny too sometimes, but just human nature. I mean, the more attractive person, the more popular person, all that stuff, you're just drawn to whatever's going to separate you as a judge from, the other person. So yes, I think that does have a lot of influence, but I don't think it's intentional sometimes. I just think it's like natural instinct, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I wasn't talking about intentionally or favoring, right? The fight. It's something that happens.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hopefully, that's one wish of mine that the judging continues to get better and better. But I don't know, man. It's been like this for a long time. I know a lot of people are saying, "Oh, the judging is so bad." But you know what? It's been like that for over 20 years, in my opinion. It's been bad. It's just that it just doesn't improve. Now there's more people paying attention, so there's more people talking about it because the judging's been bad, but it's been bad for a long time.
Yeah. And there's another topic about that you said about the people. The people are influenced too about the popularity and the famous guy and things like that, right? And sometimes you can be wrong about that. Sometimes you think the judge is doing wrong. Let's talk about that, right? But you are the wrong guy in this situation, right? Because you wanted this guy that you are hoping for the win.
Yes, I mean that's the thing. You cannot bet with your heart. You have to bet with your mind, and I do it sometimes, with other sports too. Not too much with fighting because obviously fighting is where, I've made my living and take it very serious. But in other sports like American football, I'm a Cincinnati Bengals fan. So for many years, if my team's playing up, I try to bet them just with my heart. You know what I mean? Not very smart, just with my heart. Oh, I like this team. I'm going to bet my team. Hopefully they win. That's not a good way to bet. That's not a very profitable way to bet, especially even in the UFC. You can't do that. So yes, you can't kind of bet with your heart. You have to bet intelligently and kind of put that bias aside, if that makes sense. And the popular fighter is always going to attract money no matter what. People might not even watch fighting too much, but they know a name. So they're just going to say, oh, I know that guy. I'm going to bet this guy. He can't lose. That's how much, oh, this guy, they don't even know. They just see a name, they hear a name, and they automatically think the guy's going to win, so they bet him. I mean, there's people that actually bet that way too. That is not recommended. Don't do that. Unless, if you're doing it for fun and you have a lot of money and you want to throw maybe a little bit of money that you can afford to lose, fine, do whatever you want with your money. But if you're going to try to do it serious, that's not a good way to do it.
Yeah, it was said for me, bet on the Adesanya against Alex Pereira, for example. But I've bet.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's tough. I mean, well, that one, of course, was just an awesome type of fight and situation in general, right? But yeah, it's tough. So, are you a Adesanya fan or you're a Pereira fan?
Pereira fan.
Yes, of course.
And I bet on Adesanya.
Yeah, no, I understand. I actually bet on Pereira in that fight too, in his last fight. So I was disappointed. It was looking good for a minute, but yeah, that's just high level. Both those guys are amazing.
Nick, do you think that is viable to introduce the MMA market lines into a model, into the data analysis, right? On MMA, or is something like more subjective? You talk about cardio a few minutes ago.
Right. No, there is. Like, as we evolve in the sport and there's more data that's being used, it is definitely becoming sharper. And there's a lot of data scientists that are crunching numbers and a lot of analytics that are being used. I have friends that actually have models that are very sophisticated, that they do run models and programs, and they come really good, like with really good opinions and really good output and that sort of thing too. You just have to be careful sometimes, though, with the stats. Because, I mean, the stats don't always tell you the whole story. That's where it gets a little bit confusing, because you could see one fighter maybe winning with more stats. If you look at the paper and it says, oh, my goodness, if you don't look at the fight at all, you just look at the paper, you say this guy probably won the fight. But then if you watch the fight, the guy that was punching more or landing more got beat up more. He got damaged more. He got beat, you know what I mean? So there was times where like Jose Aldo versus Rob Font, in a case like that, in a situation like that, that's happened where, you know, one person maybe outpoints the person, so the stats are going to favor him tremendously, but the person took a lot of damage and lost the fight. So in a situation like that, I think when you're running the data, it might be lead you the wrong ways, kind of, if that makes sense. But overall, as a whole, it continues to get sharper and sharper. And there's people that are developing their own systems and way about modeling this data. So yes, it can be very successful.
And today, how much you consider the market to be sharp? I don't know, especially in the props, how sharp is it? Because in money line, I think it's better. But how you consider it?
Look, to be honest with you, there's still I mean, it's been around for a while. Like we said, 20 years we've been making odds and creating numbers and stuff like that. But it's still one of the weakest markets and easiest markets to beat. So say the fight line gets bet a certain way, and then they forget about moving the props. So the props get left behind. So there's value to be had. There's a lot of mistakes still, human error mistakes, a lot of things that happen that you could definitely take advantage of. So yes, I do think overall it's a very beatable market. And if you do your homework and you really care, you put the time into it, you can win betting MMA. I'm telling you, you can do it. So that's coming from, you know, a person that's been doing it for many years. And it sounds like you guys are very knowledgeable as well. So you understand what I'm talking about. If you do your homework and you pick your spots, and of course, bankroll management is very important, that you don't bet too much on one fight and lose too much one fight where you take away, you know, your profits, and then you don't have enough room to bet more fights. Because again, you have to manage your bankroll properly to be able to kind of make it all work. That's very important. But yes, I think it is a very weak market still. Even though it's getting sharper, it's still very beatable.
Yeah. And is there a difference in originating a fight when it happens in a smaller octagon like UFC Apex? And is there a difference in crowded events compared with to events without public?
That's a good question. A little bit, because obviously the factor of the smaller cage, you know, it makes it a little bit harder for the person to maneuver. Like if you're a striker and you're fighting against a wrestler, then you don't have as much room to, you know, so all that stuff does matter. The finish probability does increase a little bit, but you know what? Since all these fights have been going on the Apex, it hasn't mattered as much as we thought it did. So at the beginning, at one time, it did kind of make a little bit more of an impact. But as we're kind of having more events take place like that, the small cage is actually not as big of a deal as we thought it was at one point. You know, if you look at it last year, year before that, I think people would have said it was significantly more of an impact. But now it's starting to kind of even out a little bit. So, but of course, I still think there is a little bit of advantage in a smaller cage for the wrestler type of guy, you know what I mean, in that situation. And there's more an advantage, of course, in the bigger cage to have more room to work if you're a type of guy that's going to be on your bicycle or moving around on your feet. So yes, you do impact it. You put a little bit into the lines in a case like that. For the arena, for the second part of your question, like the crowd, of course, if it's in Brazil, oh my goodness, like that is one of the best places. One of the hardest places if you're an American or, you know, out of the country to go in there fight, because the crowd is so amazing and they get behind their fighters so much that's a very good home crowd or the hometown advantage, if you say. So I think that influences the fighters. It influences the judges, like everything across the board. So yes, the home crowd, I think, does matter depending on where it is more so. So Brazil is one of those places that for sure I think impacts the crowd a lot, and it impacts everything. So the fighters kind of use that energy too, you know, that adrenaline, it just brings them to another level, and they perform special at times. So, you know, everybody's a little different, so it doesn't work like that for all fighters. But I think generally speaking, like I said, it just comes to mind for me, a place like Brazil so special that's where the fans are just so passionate about the sport. They understand the sport so well that it does make an impact. Yes. And then of course in the Apex or somewhere where it's going to be a little bit less of a crowd, you're not going to have that kind of, you know, atmosphere or that kind of vibe. So it's a little bit different for sure.
Okay. We are talking a few minutes ago about the athletes hype, right? In case of matchmaking favorites for this kind of fighters that are on hype, in the bettor's point of view, okay, not like a not a maker, like a bettor, your price consider the hype or not?
Yes, I do. I think it is very important. Yes, for sure. Because I think honestly, like it's just very like we give too much credit. I think everybody's human, you know, so we give too much credit for some of these fighters, and some of these people think, oh, these guys can't lose. You know, they get on a run and you get on a roll and all that stuff. So people just, everybody's human. People just kind of expect you to be not human at times. So yes, I do factor that in. As a bettor or as an odds maker, I think you have to consider that too. So as a bettor, you have to know that this price is probably a little bit inflated because of what this person represents or how popular this person is. So you have to realize that. So you can say, okay, this number's a little bit too high as it is. Now, if you find more value on top of that on the underdog, then you can say, oh my goodness, this, first of all, it's overinflated a little bit. Plus my number is way lower. So as a bettor, you can take advantage of that for sure. You have to factor that in. Yes.
Nice, because I was thinking about it, because a player that has this kind of hype, right? He has two different types of dealing with it, right? Or you become more self-confident, right? Because you're in hype, you are the man, and let's do it. Or depression can, you know, I forgot the word, but it can make you
To make a statement on a fight.
yeah
Yeah. No, pressure. That's why I respect these fighters so much, because just the pressure we were talking about, and I'm going to go back a little bit, but like the hometown, I think is very difficult for you. I know that, again, your fans are going to support you and everybody's going to be cheering for you. So it might influence the judges and give you adrenaline, but the pressure, man, of being in your hometown, maybe even being in the main event with everybody supporting you, you have to give people tickets. Everybody's there to see you fight. That's a different aspect completely. So yes, I feel bad sometimes, meaning that I feel like the pressure, the UFC does this a lot. If you pay attention, they don't make it easy on hometown fighters. A lot of times when they have a guy fighting in his home, they give him a very difficult fight. Like, it's almost like, okay, prove to us that you can take the pressure. Because if you can take that pressure, you're going to go on to better things, like meaning that you're up here, you're ready to go. So I do think they factor that kind of stuff in. So yes, I mean, I respect that for sure, because I think you're right. There's two ways you can look at it. Some fighters get that adrenaline and they get that, you know, motivation from it. But other fighters, the pressure's too much and they can't perform like their ability is. So you see them in the gym and they're a world champion in the gym, but then when they get on the stage in their own, you know, maybe backyard, they can't do that as much. So pressure, I'm glad you brought that up. It's very important. And you have to know that about your fighter, like going into that. If you're going to bet on that fighter, you have to be very secure in knowing that he's okay up here too.
Nice. I want to do a comparison with you, because in two kind of events, right? Here nowadays, I mean, the UFC is an event, right? It's not just a fight; it's a show, right? And do you think this affects your price, as I mean, the old school, like Pride, right? That you have a Bob Sapp against Vanderlei Silva. That's
Yes.
to hate, right? This affects too much your pricing too, right?
Yeah, well, to be honest with you, those type of fights I've never liked. Like, I mean, I like watching them, but I never
Yeah.
liked putting lines on it because they're so crazy. It's like the circus fights, or you know, the old Pride fights. Yes, they were very difficult because the matchups were just so crazy at sometimes, right? With that stuff. But yeah, it definitely. I'm not a fan of that stuff. Even these days, when you see some of the boxing matches that you see that aren't maybe not boxers, you know, they're guys that are crossing over, popular guys that are kind of boxing, real boxers, and then you see a real boxer beating these guys. It's, yeah, you know, I don't like that too much either. But again, honestly, I'm a fan, so I'll watch it, I'll support it because I'm interested too. So even if I'm not, you know, crazy about those circus fights, honestly, I'll still pay the money and I'll still watch it because I've got to find out what happens too. So they're not my favorite fights and they're not easy to set lines on, but I'm like anybody else in that situation. I'm a fan, I guess.
And these kind of boxing matches are happening here too. So
Yeah.
we know about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what do you think about some fights that change the type of fight between rounds, like Rotang and Demetrious Johnson fought? I think it was a year ago.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. Like the differences between, you know, with their trilogy, right? So Demetrious Johnson ended up winning 2 of those fights out of 3. But yeah, I mean, well, first of all, just the size difference in that alone right there, that's amazing. So Demetrious Johnson is just a special type of fighter. I think, to me, now that you brought him up a little bit off topic, but to me, he's the best mixed martial artist I've ever seen in my life. Ever. Like, he's so good, like, everywhere. There wasn't a weakness in his game. So for me, I know he's, maybe not in the prime of his career, but he's so good. But yeah, it's very difficult when you see a fight the first time and a guy wins and then they rematch it. A lot of people suspect, oh, this guy just got knocked out. It's going to be an easy fight. So you have to be, it's very tricky to set the second line because a lot of times they're not the same fight. No two fights are the same usually, right? So the first time they fight, it goes one way. The second time they fight, maybe the same person wins, but it's not the same fight. It's a little bit different. So you got to expect that. There's changes, there's adjustments made from fight to fight. So I think, you have to factor that in and be smart about that too.
Yeah, I agree with Demetrious Johnson. It's the most complete martial artist of all time. It's always good to see him fighting.
Yes, sir.
And still about Demetrious Johnson, that fight with, I think it was with Rodtang, 1 round of Muay Thai, 1 round of MMA.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, I thought you were talking about the trilogy fight with Maurice. Okay,
the trilogy was amazing too. I watched the 3 fights, and it's nice to talk about it too.
Yes, but in the rule set, the different rule settings like that, like one round something, yeah, that's definitely tricky too, because obviously you could have success. One fighter might have a little bit of success in one aspect of it than the second round. So yeah, we're not as comfortable setting lines in those situations yet either, to be honest with you. Those are still like a work in progress.
Okay. In your opinion, Nick, what about the future of MMA markets? Do you think MMA will continue to grow? Will take more minor leagues to take apart? Let's talk like this. In Brazil, for example, we have Jungle Fight, Shoto Brazil, but it's very rare to see lines of these events to bet on,
Yes, I think you're still going to honestly see those, like, little by little, they'll get a little bit more attention, and you'll see those events get more respect and more recognition. But honestly, not as much as like the UFC, because it's been amazing to me from 20 years ago, putting up the early numbers that we did back then. I mean, a lot of the sports books didn't want it. They were like, what are we putting up? They were arguing about putting up the lines. Like, they didn't want me to do it. A lot of them were saying, oh, it's like WWE wrestling. It's fake. They didn't believe in the UFC because it was back then, they didn't understand it. But now, from watching it back then to what it's grown into now, it's amazing. It's one of the most important bet sports, I think. I mean, as far as all sports betting now, of course, NFL for Americans especially, right? I know soccer, football that is very popular. It's one of the best sports of the world, biggest sports to bet on in the world. But for the American fans, American football, NFL is number 1, right? As far as betting and stuff like that. But mixed martial arts and UFC in particular, and I'm saying UFC because there's a big difference between the action that the sports books get for UFC than anything else. Even Bellator, which is a great league, PFL, which is a great league, they're doing a lot of good things. But honestly, I've seen it myself. The UFC money is all the way up here, and the other leagues are down here when it comes to actual money at the sports books. It's not even close. The UFC is bringing in all of the, the bigger amounts, the more respectable bettors are kind of focusing more on the UFC because they could get down bigger limits and, bigger bets in that regard. So I still think that the other leagues and the smaller organizations are far from that, but at least, we're seeing more of them get put out there. There's a lot of good quality sports books that are trying to offer some of the smaller leagues. I do see Jungle Fight odds offered, Shoto Brazil from time to time. So hopefully we continue to see those grow, because I think there is a purpose in a good vibe from that. Like, meaning I think a lot of fans would get behind it, and we're seeing a lot of the, like, weekly, the guys that are serious about betting MMA, they're betting all those stuff. So they're betting the smaller fights if they can too, and they're betting the UFC as well. But the UFC just seems to be more of the professional bettors market, and I think it's going to stay like that for a long time. But I am very proud and impressed to see what level the betting has gone to, because like I said, on a Saturday, especially when you don't have college football, when you don't have NFL football, the UFC is very important for the sportsbook's bottom line, for sure.
Okay, but you think it's the other leagues against UFC, right? As you said, the UFC has a huge limit against the others. But do you think they will keep growing together, like UFC keep growing and the others too? or you think the others will be stay as it was now?
I think they'll both keep growing at the same pace. Yeah, I think it'll be about. I mean, the UFC is always going to grow a little bit faster, even though it's so big. It's going to continue because it's like it's so big right now, and it just everybody is picking up on it. The company's like a machine right now. So I think that's going to continue to grow a little bit faster, believe it or not, than anything else. But it's also going to help everybody else kind of grow with them because there is a purpose and there is a need for a lot of quality organizations out there for sure. You know what I mean? And the fighter pay is one reason why you're not going to see, I think, a lot of these other leagues. Like it's hard to take big limits. If a fighter's only making like a couple $1,000s, you know, then you can't really have betting limits on a fighter like that for much more than that, because it's just for safety purposes. You don't want any corruption going on. So if a fighter's only making $2,000, but he can make $10,000 betting on himself, that's not good. You know what I mean? So you have to understand that too, because a lot of these smaller organizations, these fighters are just kind of trying to climb that ladder. So they're not maybe getting paid as much. So that's why you have to be a little bit more protective and secure, because you can't let this guy come in and, you know, not that it happens. I don't think it happens. It's pretty much clean. I'll tell you what, one thing that a lot of people might be surprised about, I think, is overall how clean the sport is. I know, like I said, we talk about the judges' decisions, which drive us all crazy, but I really don't think there's any corruption there. I think it's just genuinely bad, you know, at their job sometimes, if that makes sense. But overall, I think the sport as a whole, I know there's been some times in Japan back in the years, a lot of people question some of those things. I get that, but it's been pretty clean. And I think it's very hard to really go out there and, you know, be dirty and try to, you know, make a fight go a certain way, especially if the limits are controlled. So that's why you're seeing sports books kind of control smaller limits, because they want to keep everything clean and reasonable, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yes, but I think that's the thing about all the esports, right? Because when you talk about basketball, NBA and college football as the same, like NBA is a show as UFC is, right? It will be more limits on these shows.
Right. Absolutely. Even the bigger pay-per-views. Yeah, you can't see like a pay-per-view for UFC. You're right. It's a bigger show. There's more stars on that show. So say a sports book might be taking $10,000 on the main event normally. Maybe on that pay-per-view, they're taking $20,000 on that pay-per-view, you know, maybe double, because or if it's Conor McGregor, it matters.
Yes.
Like Conor McGregor, you can take $100,000 on those fights. You know, honestly, not everywhere does that, but there's just different levels. So it matters what size of the event, whether it's a fight night event, a pay-per-view, and then also who's fighting in that pay-per-view. If it's John Jones, I know recently in Las Vegas, we were taking $100,000 on John Jones's last fight. Those were the kind of limits. So one bet, you could bet $100,000 on John Jones to, you know what I mean? And there was a lot of happy bettors for sure that cashed on Jones. But that being said, so yeah, it's stuff like that. It does definitely matter.
And how do you see betting in other combat sports like karate combat, which you know well, submission grappling? Do you think the odds would be similar to boxing, because we clearly have a superior athlete, and because it's a more one-dimensional sport?
No, it's a good question, because yes, in boxing you see look at those odds sometimes. It's ridiculous. You can't even bet them. I mean, the guy's favorite -2,000, -2,500. You know, you can't touch those prices. You have to bet the underdog, or you have to leave it alone. You can't even bet it. Yeah. So yes, it's hard. I think you're going to see some of those big numbers like that and other things, and especially some of the smaller leagues. I'll tell you what, and again, I'm a fan. I'm a little biased with Karate Combat, but that's a league. Karate Combat is a league that you guys want to check out if you have not. They're doing a lot of good things, even with a little bit different, because they have a gaming app where people can play for free with their karate tokens. And I think that's actually building them a good fan base, and the way they're doing something unique with everything. So Karate Combat, I could see doing really well. Now, for them to catch up to the UFC, I mean, I don't think anybody's going to catch up to the UFC when it comes to betting like that. But a league that maybe has a shot is somebody like that that's going to do things unique, that's going to be a little bit different with their production, with the way they go about things. I think PFL is doing a tremendous job. I think, you know, I love like some of the formats and some of the production qualities that they have, that they're doing some good things as well. So stuff like that, I think if you bring uniqueness to you and you start getting the marketing and the attention to your league, it's a possibility. Those are the leagues that are going to do well, I think. So yes, a Karate Combat, and maybe LFA has done good. It's been around for so long that people do bet the LFA, but it's, you know, nothing crazy like big amounts, but I think they'll continue to grow.
What advice you like to give for beginners bettors in MMA and bettors in general?
That is a very good question. I think, first of all, just don't bet blindly. Like, meaning you have to do research and you have to try to find an advantage or an edge before you actually bet, right? So you have the more homework you do, the better you're going to be in whatever you do. Even if it's maybe if you're looking at a basketball game and you don't know much about basketball, spend a little bit of time. Like, go on the internet, look up the team, look at the data, look at the stats. Just try to get a basic idea of what you're doing, right? Of what's going on. And you might end up coming to a conclusion. And I think just kind of studying before you really start betting. For example, I know like my first betting a long time ago, they were very small bets. You know, you start off small so you don't kill yourself if you lose, because you're going to make so many mistakes. So I think you do your homework, you try to study as much as you can, and you start off betting very, very small, even if it's $1, $5, whatever the case may be, and you just try to learn from it. And I think you're going to learn by doing it real time and kind of developing your own system. Now there's so much information out there that it's a little bit easier for people. There's betting advice. There's many sites out there that you can get, different calculators, different stuff, that tools that you can kind of help you as well. But the important part is don't overbet. Don't bet what you can't afford to lose, and do your homework. And then again, just try to become a student of the game. And if you really take it serious, I think you will find an advantage and an edge. And I also think a lot of the smaller sports, a lot of the smaller markets are very good and very beatable too, because a lot of the bigger books are not spending a lot of time in those markets. So you could probably find some value in maybe some of the smaller obscure sports as well.
Okay. Want to ask something, Raf?
No, I just wanted to talk when you talk about the PFL. I think they were smart. Almost, I think all of the American sports use the regular the regular season and playoffs. So it was a model, a different model for MMA. They were very smart. And one last question. I remember right now. I think next month with Dana White Contender Series will start. For me, it's my favorite league to bet on. So yeah, and it's not a question, but it's an advice to UFC Pass Brazil. We want the UFC on the line on UFC Pass Brazil because we don't have.
Oh, yes, we got it. I'll talk to the guys. We got a show coming up, but no,
Thank you.
yeah, no, that'd be awesome, but for sure. But I agree with you. The Contender Series fight, Dana White Contender Series, those fights are awesome. And honestly, you can find value in those fights because, again, you have to do your homework, and that's where I think you have a big advantage. Do you think a lot of these sports books are not doing their homework with those fights? So if you can find film and study, like, you can really find an advantage, I think, in those smaller leagues, like those smaller fights, kind of that are, the Contender Series type of fights. I love those spots. To me, they remind me somewhat of like the LFA or, some of those smaller leagues, because those fighters are very similar. But there's a lot of good fighters, like you said, that come from Jungle Fight, Shooto Brazil, a lot of those guys that are kind of feeding into it. And if you do your homework, you can find some big advantages because those numbers are off for sure.
Nice one. Nick, we want to thank you that for your time, right? It was a pleasure to be here with you. And that's it. Do you wanna say something to the public that is watching us?
Thank you all for the time. I appreciate you guys having me on. This is awesome to just be able to share a little bit of knowledge and to get more people interested in betting and the sports betting community, and especially with UFC is a very passion of mine. So I thank you guys for letting me share that. But make sure you guys tune in. Yes, like you said, UFC Fight Pass, if you guys have it available. There's a couple of shows that we do on there, UFC on the Line. And then I also do a show with Yanni the Greek called The Gambler's Perspective. That's also on UFC Fight Pass. So please tune in and check us out on there as well.
Eu queria agradecer ao Nick também. Eu acho que foi assim espetacular. Várias dúvidas que eu tinha, e provavelmente todo mundo que aposta em MMA tinha. A gente tem muito pouco conteúdo, principalmente em português. Então, foi algo grande para mim mesmo, que eu acho que eu já vou começar a aplicar para os próximos eventos, assim, muita coisa que eu peguei. E é isso, eu acho que o SharpCast veio para isso, veio para agregar, para trazer um conhecimento diferente do que a gente vê por aí. São 2 episódios que já começaram a cumprir o que o SharpCast prometia. É isso, agradecer o convite, agradecer a honra de conversar com o Nick, é isso. Valeu.
Beleza. Pessoal, esse aí foi o final do nosso segundo episódio. Espero que vocês tenham gostado do bate-papo aqui com o Rafa e com o Nick. E nos vemos no próximo.